So welcome to the distribution panel. We're talking about ways that art gets from people, or from artists to people, and the technologies that are changing that. The old institutions that are still relevant to varying degrees, and the new institutions that are changing a lot of how we function. We have some actually really fascinating panelists who have done work both independently and inside of larger companies that have done distribution, and who work through platforms and have experience doing a lot of different things in this field. I have a hunch that, much like our time panel, that money will be a recurring theme throughout the day because we're artists, and duh. And let's get things started off. So, Andy, would you like to lead in with some of your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm a sort of community manager of sorts at Tumblr. So I work with artists and galleries and museums, all on the same level, helping them leverage the platform effectively, encourage use, develop partnerships, things like that. So I mean, I feel like my role as a community manager, especially with artists, is about leveling that playing field and giving people tools and access to distribute their work and create their work and have an audience. So, I don't know, what? Those are some thoughts.
Victoria, can you talk a little bit about how your art gets to people through your day job and through television?
I'm a documentary animator, so most of the work that I do is actually as a factual animation as part of a larger live action film. So I actually have to work in conjunction with everyone from producers and directors and fact checkers. So there's a big emphasis on accuracy, which is sort of unusual in animation. But my work ends up being part of a much larger whole, and so I have to sort of integrate my stuff with that. And so some of what I do is very much mine, but other stuff I have to match the style, I have to make it feel like someone's part of someone else's film. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How does your company sort of relate to the other companies and then eventually getting things on the air?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
Well, because you work at the documentary group.
Yeah, I should explain that. I work at the documentary group, which is the former Peter Jennings Productions. So we're independent from ABC, but we have a partnership with them where we're in their offices and we do work for them. We do work for PBS. We do theatrical educational broadcasts. And there's also a balance of everything from who our audience is to who our funders are, because even with news documentary, it's all about what you can get people to give you money to make. So there's that money thing again. So there's a lot of different people who have to weigh in at every stage of the process.
And then you also do a lot of things that are outside of sort of the big content system.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about some of those things?
I also make stuff for the web. Kevin and I are part of a podcast with also Stephen in the audience. So we have a history panel show comedy podcast. We also just make videos for the web and have a lot of other independent projects. And there's what?
You're also at a conference you're doing?
Yeah, and this conference.
Yeah.
But so there's an interesting thing that happens where when you get a much more direct communication with your audience that way. That even if I've had stuff that has like 10 million viewers and I never hear any feedback because it's been on national television and no one actually talks about it after it's screened. But on the web you get comments, and even though you've only had like a few thousand people, you actually hear what they think, and it's much more engaging.
So, Pablo, do you want to give us some background on some of the things that you've done through larger companies?
Sure. So, currently I work for Safari Books Online as a product manager, working on making their reading systems and whatnot, which is kind of a really interesting leap for me because before that I was working in traditional publishing. I worked at Macmillan running Tor.com for a couple of years and did some community management as well as a lot of producing and some editorial work and a little bit of everything. It was a pretty small operation. Working with, my first love, well, my second love really, science fiction and fantasy. My first love is comics. We'll talk about that later. And I also worked at Open Road Media, which is a bit of a startup, but really still kind of a traditional, like the company's DNA is very much in traditional publishing. Building their their marketing platform and handling their content and how their content is syndicated and putting together packages for marketing purposes and coordinating with video production crews that we had in-house that would go out to authors' places and kind of make little mini documentaries about the authors and whatnot. So building all of those systems and coordinating all those systems and making sure that everything works together and works, as you push it out as well, because obviously it doesn't matter if it's all internally consistent. If you can't push it out, it's useless. So that's the big company work, and I did 7 years in advertising as well, working for big companies like J. Walter Thompson and things like that as an art director. So that's my big company work.
How does the big company work feel in terms of your art and then getting to people, or your creative work, even if it's not technically your work?
When you reduce it, at least for me, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about this at the talk. For me, there are added benefits to doing the big company work, but for me, basically, it's a way to subsidize, my other work, really. My comics work and my printmaking work and things like that, which aren't necessarily things that I'm doing for profit, or I do want to make a profit when I can, but that's not always why I do it. At its bare bones, most basic form, I've been pretty lucky in that most, if not all of this type of work has also kind of had other attractives, and had a lot of other benefits. I get to work with interesting people, interesting technology. I get to meet a lot of authors and people that I admire. I get to apply my trade, which not everybody can say about their day job. Which I consider myself pretty lucky in that respect. So there is a lot of overlap. I do think though that there is, maybe not so much at my current job, because we're very user focused and very focused on getting some feedback and making sure that we use metrics correctly. But I think particularly at my previous jobs at larger traditional publishing companies, there was a lot of that disconnect that you're talking about, where you are kind of speaking to a very large audience. You're not getting the same quality or quantity of feedback that you're getting with the smaller, more immediate and more engaging projects that are actually direct on the internet.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how your comic making and print making functions and how you get those things out to people as well?
Sure. So I do a lot of freelance work in general. I do freelance design work. I work a lot with authors, particularly science fiction authors, simply because it's what I love and it's the people that I know. So I do a lot of bookmaking, a lot of ebook making. We've done some Kickstarter funded projects and things like that, which have been very successful. And as you say, I also do printmaking. I make silkscreen posters just for the hell of it, very small runs, and not on a particular schedule. Just whenever something hits, I'll pop over. I just moved, but I used to live right next to Pratt Institute, which has a fantastic printmaking studio. So I kind of pop over there, at like 11 o'clock on a Friday night, so that I don't run afoul of the security people and just kind of get in there and do some printing and get out. That's gotten a lot harder over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So, moving is probably a good thing. I'm going to have to find like an actual setup that I can use. So I do a lot of that, and I do it for myself mostly. I do some editions. I've done some work that has dovetailed nicely with some of my professional work, so I've kind of ridden on the coattails of that. I've done some work for like people like Cory Doctorow and like some things like that, which have gained enough attention that I would basically have to go back to the press and make like an edition of 100 because I've got 60 orders, but that's not really the norm. And then I do some very experimental comics work, trying to bring the comics medium into the digital realm, using web native technologies to render the same type of layout, but as a comics page. But again, straight for the browser and utilizing the capabilities of the web technology, the web stack, to kind of take comics a little bit further. So again, that's just stuff that I do on the side, not so much for money, but more for love.
I want to press you a little bit more on the distribution side. So if the side stuff isn't that much for money, how do you think about pushing the content to the audience?
I often don't, to be honest with you. And that's...
A problem I find with a lot of artists.
What's that?
A problem I find with a lot of artists.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't sometimes, half of it, but I suspect that a lot of times you find that it's just it's ignorance. They're very focused on doing the art and they don't necessarily want to think about all that other stuff. I generally, like I said, my main purpose with this type of work isn't necessarily, it's for myself. So it's not necessarily about getting it out there or about, getting recognition for it or, making noise or making money. It's more for myself, so I'm not very concerned with the distribution aspect of it. That being said, sometimes, again, the network effect takes over and you get your distribution despite yourself. Like for example, I mentioned earlier the Cory Doctorow thing, that's exactly what that was. I was working at Tor Books as a cover designer, and this book comes across my transom where I just basically had to turn it from a hardcover to a paperback. And there was nothing to it. It was a short, very simple design job, and I wasn't expected to do anything creative. But I did that, and that was done, but then I kind of had a bunch of ideas knocking about in my head, so I came up with a completely different design for the cover. And I showed it to my boss, and I was like, look, I know that for many, many reasons, including marketing and sales and all that stuff, this really isn't what you want to do, but there's this, and she happened to really like it, and she showed it to Cory Doctorow, who put it up on freaking Boing Boing, and the next thing I know, I'm getting a lot of inquiries about it, and I ended up, making a nice print run. I blew it up and turned it into a silkscreen poster, and sold something like, I don't know, 60 or 80 of them. I just got rid of the make good, which is what you call, the prints that you pull while you're preparing to actually do your print run. I just got rid of them last week. So sometimes things kind of take on a life of their own, and you get that distribution or you get that network effect despite not really doing much about it. But I don't particularly go out of my way to studiously cultivate that.
Yeah. I think that's going to be a really interesting story to think about because of how the serendipitous getting of big wide internet distribution on frickin' Boing Boing, can be such a random thing and such an important thing, and also how a big distribution run for this is a couple dozen, not a couple thousand.
Right.
And so it's there's the big audience is really important, but how much do those big things translate?
And that's part of the reason that I don't make a lot of noise about it. It's tough, it's physically demanding and it's time-consuming work. And, the difference between printing up an edition of 20 and an edition of, 150 or 200 or whatever, it's quantifiable.
Yeah.
So, sometimes, at least considering that it's not necessarily a revenue-generating endeavor for me, sometimes that's actually, large numbers is actually a bug, not a feature.
Yep.
So,
So, Lisa.
Yeah. My name's Lisa. I'm pretty sure I'm on the panel because I ask good questions. And Kevin sent us a few questions in advance so we could think, and the one that really resonated with me was how to make sense of distribution as artists. And one of the projects I worked on before coming to Fractured Atlas and working on NYC Performing Arts Spaces, which is in the program and you'll learn about later today, was actually called the Virtual Pillow Project. And I worked with Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival on creating an audience engagement platform from 80 years worth of dance history videos from 1936 right on up to this season. And that was a big project, and I was paired with a 60-year-old archivist. And the brilliant thing about getting a lot of funding and working on a project that's about innovation and being paired with a brilliant 60-year-old archivist is they're very wise, and they understand cycles, and they understand that change is constant and that formats change. And I learned a ton from him on that project. And he taught me to really look for patterns, right? Change is always happening. The difference now is this just happening faster. So the tools that we have as artists, and I personally believe passionately that artists are well suited with these tools, is to look at the big picture in the way that you would compositionally. You know, look for patterns, look for anomalies, look at the opposite, look at the void. You know, it's not about the name brand, it's not about Kickstarter, it's not about Tug, it's not about those types of things. It's about on-demand being a distribution model that's surfacing. What can I do with that as an artist potentially? How can I potentially leverage that? Has anybody heard of Tug, actually? I mean, just sort of throwing that out there. If you want to see an independent film and you live in Alabama and it's probably not going to come there, and you get enough friends that want to see that same independent film, you go on to Tug and you say, we know for sure that this many people are going to buy tickets and that movie theater will play your film. It's not everywhere, but it's a distribution model that's starting to surface out of economy and necessity. And then Paul this morning, brilliant, when he came to Paul, right? Paul, yes. You should learn about Paul. When he came to a very important catalyst moment in internet history, his question was, how does it work? And then what's it going to look like, 15 years from now, I think you said? What does it look like in the future? And again, I think artists are really good at thinking in that way. So that's sort of my good questions about how to make sense of distribution.
It's really interesting seeing sort of how artists do things faster than big institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because we have to, because we're constantly looking for new ways to make $5, and partly because we can do things more quickly because we're only one person, so we can try a lot of different things.
I think that's right, Kevin, and I'm seeing this. I'm seeing patterns of this. What I'm calling on-demand model, even in space, because I manage NYC Performing Arts Spaces, which is a website where you can search for performance and rehearsal space. And I do outreach with venues, and I'm seeing more and more artist-managed spaces that are 24-hour on-demand, meaning they don't have the money to staff the space all the time, but if you're willing to rent the space, they'll find somebody to come to be in the gallery or to be in the raw space in Brooklyn or whatever. I'm seeing more and more of that as a way that they can earn revenue and then also have space for their work.
Yeah.
I just like to add that in talking about finding new ways to do things, one thing that's been really fascinating is my company has a really long history going back to when they were part of ABC News, and they have something like 80 films, and we've discovered that there are tons of people still searching for our old documentaries. And someone else put them on YouTube, and so now we're going back and having to try to figure out how to actually monetize those on the internet to see if anyone would actually pay to see a documentary that's 20 years old, because they're looking for them. It's been really fascinating.
And they're rare.
Yeah, and they're not available on DVD. We have stuff that's completely out of print that's from 3 years ago. We have films from 20 years ago that are still available. It's really strange.
It's also a really interesting story about how paying attention to the nitty-gritty data aspects of your website can pay dividends as an artist, because you're making business decisions based on search terms.
Oh yeah, like it turns out everyone's searching for this one documentary they did with Peter Jennings called How to Get Fat Without Really Trying. That shows up almost every day in our search results on our web stats, and we've been following that a lot to decide which films to put online first.
That's really interesting.
So one of the things that we do at my current day job is Safari Books is essentially, for those of you who don't know, it's basically a subscription service for technical books. So O'Reilly books about how to code C++ or whatever. They're all on there, and you pay a subscription fee and you gain access to all these books.
What's it called again?
Safari Books Online.
Oh, right.
We have all sorts of books from all sorts of publishers. So one of the things that we do is we mine our usage data to identify what trends are in the industry. Because it's really interesting. You pull up your search terms for what people are looking for to learn about, and you can tell, everybody's really into Ruby on Rails, or C++ is gaining traction since iOS and all that stuff. So you start seeing these trends, and you can really you can go back to the publisher and you can say, hey, look, this HTML book of yours that's 3 years old or whatever. I'm making it up, but this book of yours that's 3 years old. You might want to consider updating it because a lot of people are looking for this information. So.
I know a lot of this stuff is in the context of bigger companies and existing works and sort of search terms that map to a particular item, and not about search terms that lead to an artist's website that lead to artistic thinking and artistic decisions. I don't think we've seen that yet, but I think we're going to see it a bit more. And I think that the tools for that are going to be really interesting when someone finally gets around to building them. So Annie, I want to come back to you for a bit, because your job is really fascinating, and it's community management is one of these jobs that didn't exist 5 years ago, and now is incredibly important and incredibly influential. And people who don't have them, like at the arts nonprofit I work for, we're looking around going, this isn't really a role that we have. We do have somebody who's in charge of individual fundraising. Who's like, but that job has historically involved a lot of mailing lists and annual appeals and not community management.
Right.
And as a field, I think it's really, really important. So if you could tell some stories for what are the things that you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I think in relation to this, a lot of it has to do with dealing with the push-pull between creators, curators, and the audience. So it's sort of like knowing where in the meritocracy to like push attention and promote things and talk about who has the best what. So when I'm looking for artists to feature or to who I think would be great for a collaboration on our editorial department, it's am I looking at artists who are in charge and harnessing their own presence, or am I looking for artists who are featured in a lot of the curated blogs and who have followings there? So it's there's sort of like a weird push-pull between all those three people who sort of have their own influence and their own importance, self-importance. So yeah, I don't have any specific anecdotes, but that's sort of a day-to-day thing for me.
So you sort of look through the community and find artists who are doing different things and connect them with other elements of the community in some way?
Yeah, definitely. So I run a community blog that is a place for anybody to submit, to promote themselves, let people know that they're there, and sort of centralize that space, because a lot of the internet is sort of this vast land that you could put your work anywhere, but you put it on Tumblr, you put it on YouTube, because there's the opportunity to get discovered. And that's sort of like why I do what I do, is to sort of centralize that and make sure that there's a hub for discovery.
And so is that sort of one of the things that you try to do when you look through Tumblr every day? Is like, what I'm doing is discovery?
Yeah, and I definitely want to be the point person for that kind of thing, for discovery, and for people to be like, hey, I'm here. So there's sort of an element of hand-raising that is involved.
Do people wind up contacting you with questions about sort of how to use the platform?
Absolutely, and I try to provide resources that are publicly available that hopefully I have the right search terms for. But there are definitely some best practices and things that I try to make publicly available to any artist.
This is actually one of the things that I really admire about Tumblr as a platform and as a system, is that it's really, really fantastic for distribution.
Mm-hmm.
For baking in, like you can have a website, like this is why Ruckus NYC is on a Tumblr site. You can follow the blog, and it also functions as a web page for the project. And there's this really, really rich community that works along all these different
And your
things.
blog is not the sole portal. When you're tagging things, the tagging system is actually really important to distribution. It creates a whole nother place for people to find you. They don't have to be searching for you, they don't have to know about you. Ruckus doesn't really
no one's going to search for that.
For Ruckus, yeah. But if you tag your posts,
Yeah.
like art conference or like learning about distribution, things like that, those are kinds of things that people will search for.
Though we actually did get a robot retweeting every tweet that had Ruckus in it. There's some tweet bot called Ruckus Alert. I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
Sorry if it's tweeted at you guys. I don't know what the hell that's about.
Yeah, we have no idea who that is. It's
Yeah.
an automatic thing. And if you say the word Ruckus on Twitter, it will retweet you.
It's the new course ebooks.
Yeah. One thing that's been nice about having a Tumblr is also that there's sort of this built-in community that if you have something that on its own stands on its own, like the pictures of all of our board presenters.
Oh my god, Pablo, your
including
photo is
Pablo, there's
amazing.
an amazing photo. If you have not seen this, go look it up. It's amazing. Which a ton of people shared their photos who probably had no idea who any of us were, just because they were funny.
Yeah.
And so there was this sort of outside community thing that just went off on its own and became its own separate thing. And it's really nice to have that built in.
Lisa, you were going to say something?
I retracted.
One thing I'd like to say is that, one thing my company has really discovered is that if you don't put your stuff online, but it is publicly available in some other way, someone else will put it online for you.
Yes.
Oh,
And
God.
they will take the credit, they will take the money, they will take the ad views, happily. I've had people offer me torrents of movies I've worked on, which is weird.
What did you say?
I said it would probably be a little awkward for me to download something I already had because I made it myself.
I had a really interesting experience, and the corollary to that is security by obscurity is all well and good, but if it's online, somebody will find it.
Yeah.
So I've been, as I mentioned earlier, printmaking is time intensive and time consuming and whatnot. So I've been looking into some of these services where you can kind of send off to buy high resolution prints on really nice Giclée prints or whatnot. So I did a couple of tests on my website, and they weren't necessarily they were only accessible through a direct I thought through a direct URL and not linked to anywhere, and I was just kind of testing things out. And I kind of forgot about it. I got busy, and a couple of weeks later, a friend of mine, somebody who actually has turned into a dear friend who I met on Twitter, was like, "I just ordered one of your prints, man. That's awesome!" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Yeah, I saw that you have them up, and there's the little buy button, and you can get the." I'm like, "Oh shit, right." and it's fine. It was a good print, and the test worked, and it was great, but. It was one of these things where I was so sure. I was like, I can kind of hang my ass out here because, it's just a URL. Nobody's going to get there. I can test things out. It's online. People can find it.
Gotta lock that up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's coming up in my mind is the difference between distributing from a company or from a brand and from yourself. And how when you're presenting your work as you, there's a lot of you that you're presenting as well. And when you're presenting your work as the documentary group or as Safari Books Online, there's not this obligation to be people in the same way. Lisa, did that impact how the dance project got built and marketed, or was that really under the brand of the company?
As soon as you started saying that, I thought of a sort of an anecdote of a recent conversation I had with Monica Barnes, who's a really great choreographer who recently had a huge boost in distribution in terms of people being aware of her modern dance company because she was on This American Life with Ira Glass. And that collaboration has gone on to continue. She's performing with him in October. And I've known her for a long time, but her marketing consultant was giving her really strong advice about her newsletters, standard marketing for an artist usually, about how they needed to be more official because she needs to be able to ask people for money, and it needs to be more formal language, and it needs to be the company, and it's not Monica inviting you to the performance, it's Monica Barnes and company, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Monica, I think that's bunk. That does not fit with your vibe. That doesn't fit with the kind of work you make. That doesn't fit with how you connect to your audience. Just trust how you're doing it. And she actually skewed more towards it feeling like a personal note from Monica. And I, of course, encouraged her to check her open rates and see, and she doesn't have time for that or whatever, but it felt more what made sense for her. But that's a really interesting question in terms of the artist, getting it from the artist and getting it from an organization. I was at the Brooklyn Flea actually for Fractured Atlas, and we were selling some of our members' works and talking to people about insurance and fiscal sponsorship while they were at the Brooklyn Flea. And we had books of our artists, and this woman was sort of hemming and hawing over the book, and she loved the book, and she was asking her daughter, don't you have a friend this age that would want the book, and blah, 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 and she really wanted to buy it. And then she took a picture and she said, oh, well, I'll buy it online because that's just as good for the artist, right? And we were like, no, it's not. Pay the full price now. Don't go buy it on Amazon, buy it now. But just, she didn't even think that would make a difference to the artist.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we're all from the internet, basically. And
Not really here.
Okay, yeah. And so that means in a certain sense we're really comfortable with everything being more personal. And we're also comfortable with that personality being part of the argument to buy in a certain way. Don't buy pirate, buy full price, don't buy from Amazon, buy from a bookshop. All of these things sort of tie into the value of the person.
And I think you can definitely get away with that, for sure. The audience and people who are buying things crave that authenticity. And so, if you can be your own distributor, you're doing a service to yourself to not put it out there yourself. I experienced this personally, as somebody who buys art from artists on Tumblr that I follow for a long time. It attaches a sentiment, and you start to like care about that person, and like I send email exchanges with the photographers I have close relationships with, and I get to tell those stories when people come over, and I'm like, I got this from this awesome photographer that I found. So yeah, I think so it makes me feel really cool. So yeah, I think that it's totally, you can totally get away with that as an artist.
Yeah, it definitely adds another dimension. I think the most salient example, you know, which probably everybody here is aware of, is the Amanda Palmer Kickstarter. You know, getting
Who backed it?
there you go.
See
So,
that?
yeah,
That's
there
great.
you go.
So you got these, and it's really interesting what just happened recently with her, and this whole paying musicians thing, which is fascinating to me. I'm a big advocate of, you know, not doing spec work and not working for free and all this stuff, and it's a really, really big deal for me. Like, I'll get cranky on Twitter about it. And this happens with Amanda Palmer. For the people who aren't familiar, Amanda Palmer raised $1.2 million to put together a record and a tour independently of any labels. It turned out that she had decided to, for her backing horns and strings, she decided to solicit volunteers at different cities that she was playing at. And a few people in the music industry got very upset about it because they were like, you know, musicians should get paid if they're on stage, etc., etc. And I am all for that. I fucking agree 100%. Artists should get paid for their work. But it's Amanda Palmer, she's my buddy, she emails me, how could she be fucking up? You know, it really makes a difference. And I found myself kind of giving her much, much, much more the benefit of the doubt than I would otherwise. You know, that I would if it were Warner Brothers, or if it were like a big company or something like that, that was, you know, looking for volunteers for like a gig or something. And eventually, you know, the interesting thing is that eventually she did resolve it. She was like, okay, we're gonna pay our musicians, and you know, it definitely, it came across to me as someone who's, you know, trying new things and obviously experimenting and working with our new modes of distribution and engagement, and screwing up and fixing it, you know, and that was perfectly fine by me. And a lot of the reason that it was perfectly fine by me, as opposed to, and I get very cranky on Twitter when I see people doing spec work or soliciting spec work, as opposed to that reaction, and a lot of it has to do because the communication I was getting was directly from the artist, and she was basically laying it out there and being very transparent and explaining where she was coming from, you know.
It's really interesting, the perspective, because a lot of the response to it was, one of the explanations that came out about why that was such a big controversy was that because it was a crowdfunded album, everybody felt a lot more ownership in her decision-making process. Also, she's a woman, and so she's got a lot of extra flack.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting hearing that you're also saying, well, she gets a bit more benefit of the doubt because she is so personal with 1 million+ people.
Well, I think a lot of, I mean, when you add that kind of ownership dynamic to it, I think it's very hard to generalize.
Yeah.
Because you do get people who feel very invested, who feel, oh, you know, all of a sudden you're screwing me over. You know, I've got this other Kickstarter project that I backed that they're kind of being dicks about something. You know, they're shipping late, and I just moved, and I was like, can you change my address? And they're like, it's too late for that. I'm like, but it hasn't shipped, and you're shipping late. Just, you know, give me. Anyway, the point is, you do get kind of that sense of ownership. But you know, I think that, and that leads to a sense of entitlement, and that sense of entitlement can sometimes be very unhealthy.
Yeah, and this is the expectation of personability and the expectation of trust.
Right.
And the expectation that a big company is going to be your friend, or a big independent artist is going to act like your friend and not act like some guy selling you something.
And I think that's one of the things that people kind of gloss over with these types of things. Kickstarter or not, you know, these people are running a business. And if they're not running a business, you really shouldn't fund them, or you really shouldn't back them, because, you know, they're not serious players.
This brings up a question I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to weigh in on, which is sort of one of the underlying distribution questions, particularly from Amanda Palmer and Louis C.K. and Aziz Ansari, and a lot of other people who've had big independent financial successes in the last year or so, which is a lot of these people had big starts in their career through big content, for lack of a better word, through record labels, through TV, through a lot of other larger companies, and so they had this mass media established fan base, which then they took independent. And one of the questions I see floating around a lot is, how possible is it to do that without first having had a record?
That's a question for the artists. I don't know.
It's actually interesting that the company I work at is a small company, but came out of ABC, came out of big media, came out of old media. It was Peter Jennings' team. They had national distribution on a daily basis for decades. And now it's a small company, but it gets them indoors that they can go, oh, we've done 1 million news documentaries, we have this long history. And I don't think we'd be able to do the kind of independent documentary work that we do without that. But that said, I've done stuff on my own, or actually Kevin and I made a really silly little video a couple years ago where our entire distribution effort was we tweeted at a couple of blogs and suggested it to I think the Daily What. And we're up to 500,000 views now, and it was number 3 on all of YouTube in France at one point, which was weird. And so there is this possibility that you can have stuff just, particularly if it's relevant to something that's going on in the news, if you can sort of tie into something else that's happening, you can kind of attach onto that and get something out there pretty easily. But a big project that actually makes you a ton of money, it feels to me like you still need that history with big media or backers or some kind of gatekeepers saying you guys are good. You need that stamp of approval somewhere.
Yeah, there's still these institutions that have a lot of power, like This American Life, blessing the choreographer. People listen to the radio, and like Cory Doctorow secretly runs the internet with a cape and a wand, but
From a balloon.
yeah,
Yes,
and a balloon.
the balloon is very
And the
important.
balloon is very key. And he's the only guy who can cosplay as himself. But still, the radio has a certain power.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, absolutely, the power of big companies as distribution channels is undeniable, and it's certainly essential to most of the success stories in one way or another. On the other hand, it takes years to become an overnight success.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean there's no hard work going into it, and that these people haven't paid their dues. Then there's the flip side, which I'm actually encountering with a couple of the authors that I work with as we make ebooks. So I work with one particular author who's also a dear friend who has a very stable and moderately successful publishing career, writing career with one of the big 6 publishers, and he started off with this series of books, and at one point his publisher said, "Look, we want to contract you for more books, but just not in this series for whatever reason. I mean, it doesn't they were decently selling books, they were earning out, but they weren't hits, and they were like, hey, look, this other thing is hot right now. Why don't you try writing in this other mode, or using these other topics, etc., etc." And that's worked out wonderfully. Like he's doing great. The publisher really knows what the hell they're doing. They made the right call. But then there's the fans of these original books, which were never finished, and there's a handful of us. There's a few of us. And the author decided, you know what, I'm going to put this on Kickstarter. I'm going to see who's interested in me finishing these books off. And he raised something to the tune of $16,000 to finish, to write the next book in the series. And he was like, look, I normally would have gotten a $3,000 or $4,000 advance for this book. These are basically pre-orders. It's going to take me about 3 or 4 months to knock this out, and I can do that with 10 grand, which is what he was aiming for, and he made 16. I came onto the project, and I also obviously am charging for my work, so that's about $3,000 or $4,000 worth of work, something like that. It basically turns out that the project is doing a little bit better than breaking even, and that's good. That's a way to get work out there that people want to see. That may not necessarily be attractive for these big companies because it's not at scale and it's not something that's going to generate a lot of revenue the way that these big machineries need, but it's going to generate enough revenue to cover costs and to have a little bit of profit. And you get this work out there in the world, which otherwise wouldn't have been possible because these big companies consider it to be too small. So there's both. I think there's, to come back to your original question, there's the initial push that that the big media companies can provide, but then you can also take it in different directions. You don't necessarily have to do what, say, Amanda Palmer or Louis C.K. are doing, which is effectively replacing that entire structure outright.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean it doesn't mean you can go without a structure. It means you have to hire a staff of 10,
Right.
which costs a lot of money.
Yeah, it does. And this project has been really interesting in terms of learning about, and actually a few of the projects that I've been involved with in terms of, a few of the book projects that I've been involved in have been learning experiences for the author where they realize that publishing is a lot of work, and the more time you do publishing stuff, the less time you have to write. So a lot of the authors have been like, you know what, this is great, I know that I can do it, it's wonderful that I can do it, I don't want to do it anymore, I'm going back to the publisher because I just want to write, so there's that trade-off.
So do you guys feel we're coming about on 12:30, so it might be nice to open up to questions if you guys.
Sure.
I want to make sure you guys each get a crack at the burning distribution questions. How do I get my question out to 4 whole panelists? Louisa.
I just wanted to ask Annie, you mentioned your best practices, and that maybe you could give us a quick rundown.
Well, if you come to my presentation at 5 p.m. tonight, you will see all the best practices and all of the features. But number one thing you can do is tag everything relevant about a post so that it can be distributed within all those different portals. On Tumblr.
How do you not look like a tag slut?
Well, so Tumblr actually does a pretty good job of masking the look of the tags kind of in the dashboard and on your blog. But the tag pages still will exist no matter what, as long as you tag them. Yeah. Tag war.
Steven?
Hi. When you're doing something and you suddenly get internet famous, how do you quickly have something? Are you always ready with something to go to monetize on that, or does it take a little while? Do you waste time in the turnaround? Do you feel like you're missing opportunities? Do you get tired of trying to make money off of it?
That's an interesting question.
Okay,
What
so
was the first question?
what's the reaction to being internet famous, I think
How
was
do
the
you
question? How do you handle that?
How do you pivot to actually
Yeah.
keep building?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Sorry, that was kind of.
Well, I'm really big in the Philippines. So no, really, I have a lot of Filipino followers. But I'm kidding.
So actually, Victoria, do you want to talk a little bit about the video that got a ton of views and see sort of what happened when that happened?
That was actually an interesting thing because we made this goofy little video of was that when the iPhone 4 launched? God, it was that long ago. Of a bunch of little Android robots interrupting an iPhone launch animated video, but we launched it in a day or two before the phone actually came out, and we actually got all these bloggers who were desperate to write about a product they didn't know anything about, and so there was something they could post. But we couldn't actually monetize it because it didn't fit in YouTube's guidelines for what you're allowed to put ads on. And then we didn't have anything to follow it up right away, and I really wish we had. I think that's something that we could have built on, and we didn't actually get a chance to do that.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think it can be, when something goes kind of viral sort of haphazardly, it can be a little bit restrictive. To an artist. I mean, I know artists on Tumblr who have made side projects that they sort of this is just some fun thing I'm gonna do that went crazy, and then they were now I feel this is my thing, and I didn't want this to be my thing.
21st
so how
century
do I?
typecasting.
Yeah. So how do I get people to look at this other stuff that I do that I actually care more about? So it's kind of hard. You sort of maybe sometimes don't want that. But.
This is a piece of advice that I heard recently, which is work on things that you love, because if it's successful, you'll have to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And this potential that suddenly some random hobby could blow up in this way that was impossible without the internet.
Right.
I think there's this really interesting tension happening, particularly in the arts world and the internet, where on the one hand, artists craft, and craft takes time, and takes care, and takes attention, and sometimes you just can't rush it. In a very tangible sense, not in a I'm smoking cigarettes and sipping coffee at the cafe waiting for inspiration. In a very this is the process, and this is how long it takes. and there's sometimes that tension between that craft and that attention to detail and that preoccupation with craft and the enormous scale that the internet provides. So for example, when that poster of mine kind of went big, it was really challenging and it was very unexpected. All of a sudden I had tons of orders that I hadn't necessarily solicited, but I certainly didn't want to renege on, because they were people who were interested in my work and they were people who wanted what I was doing, and I felt like I had a responsibility in a way to deliver. And it was very challenging to kind of scale up to that. And then with the expectation, without the expectation rather, that it's sustainable, because you scale up and then you fulfill that demand and maybe it goes away. It's like you're saying, they're only interested in that one lolcat or whatever it is you're doing. They're not interested in the opera that you're composing over here. So scaling up your processes and your business, your pipelines, whatever, in that narrow scope can be very challenging and isn't always sustainable. So there is definitely a big tension there. And I have no answers.
Back to my sort of theme of general questions that help you find your own answer, because you're talking about how do you prepare for internet fame, I think is what you said. So a little bit in our conversation, we're conflating distribution and reach. Like we're sort of using the same word for marketing and visibility as we are for distribution, and they're different things. So, if that internet moment fame happens, is it more about reach? A lot more eyeballs got on you, like Monica Bill Barnes, like thousands of people in America saw her, but are they, is it a distribution model where she doesn't have anything she can sell to them? But could she, and needing to think about it in that way. And it's hard because it's going to happen so fast, right? And you're saying, like, do you have that sort of ready to go just in case? That it could be something that's actually distribution and not just visibility, and sure wouldn't hurt to be thinking ahead.
There is a Tumblr called Sexy Sweaters that's really popular. It's, they just Photoshop whole images onto crew neck sweatshirts, and it blew up, and everyone was like, we love this, it was really mimetic, it was totally on trend, and then everyone was like, make these, and they were like, it's really hard to make all over print sweatshirts, actually, we can't do this. So they're just like, they were hypothetically popular, so. Hypothetically popular.
So don't invent a product unless you can make it.
Yes.
I mean, this leads to an interesting idea, which is, always have something that people can buy that you don't actually have to make. So
that's good advice.
Always have something available on your websites that people go, oh, I like you, I'll buy a digital download of this thing.
Yeah.
And then the robots will take care of it. And then they'll take over and you won't have to make art anymore.
Or fake or eat.
But
that the robots will take care of it.
yeah.
That's my new distribution philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking there's an interesting monetization problem, which is I wanted to set up an ad for what I was doing, and I didn't realize until I ran through the ad and Google rejected it that Skype was a trademark and I couldn't use the word Skype without Skype's permission. And so I said, well, yeah, I'll go get Skype's permission. I never did. I never even approached them. I just ran it with a different key name. This isn't a question. That's just.
It's Janet.
But there's I guess I should have just emailed them. Skype.
But that actually brings up a really interesting point, and I think it's somewhat.
I should say that again for the posterity. Jen was talking about using a trademark term Skype in a Google ad that didn't belong to her, and how to handle that. And do you tell Google I'm just going to do this, or do you contact them and ask for permission, or do you say video chat?
They won't run it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't.
Okay.
But the tangential to that, a lot of the work that many of us do is very much part of remix culture. And, when you're taking, like for example in my case, when you're taking imagery and you're taking pieces of other people's works or copyrighted or trademarked images to do work, and you're doing it at personal scale, it's okay, because nobody's really looking at it, you're doing it for your own. But then what happens when you blow up and all of a sudden, you're using some AP photographer's picture for...
Yeah.
What's that?
For For your Obama poster.
Right, exactly, for the Obama poster, and you know, it blows up, and all of a sudden you're in a courtroom with the AP, and they're being assholes about it, and you know, the law is on their side.
So somebody needs to come up with a way of dealing with symbiotic memes, and it goes back to the Creative Commons or the notion of copyleft. You know, share widely, attribute accurately, and share the love. If you make a profit or if you make the money, pay the artists. And so there needs to be a systemization of that. Maybe we have to encode that as a kind of an automated structure. You can register your meme, and whenever anybody replicates and shares that meme to further their own meme, then there's some kind of a return.
I'm actually working on a thing right now that is
The meme exchange.
And this is something that I can't monetize because it's all based on someone else's work. But I've taken the Gangnam Style video and I've swapped the people and horses.
You're serious? It's got a cartoon dancing
I'm
horse.
going to be showing this later today. You can see an early version of it. It's not quite done yet, but this is my little silly project that I'm working on right now, and I'm like, I can't monetize this, but it's probably going to get more views than anything else I do, just because it's such a popular thing that it's based on. But I can't get, instead of like being able to monetize it and take everything, I can't take any piece of that, even though I'm actually doing like entire original character animation for it. And there's like no way to, I can't license it in such a way that I would ever be able to turn a profit doing that. And it's just a web video joke.
Nick, you got a question?
What has a tip jar?
Vimeo.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you might still have rights questions.
Yeah, there's usage rights and things with the music publisher, I'm sure,
Yeah.
and stuff.
When you upload to a platform, you often have to say, I affirm that I own all of this. Whenever anyone uploads a television show to YouTube, they swear up and down in the terms of use that they own the copyrights, and then they do it anyway.
Yep.
And then they put in the description, no copyright infringement intended, as if that means anything.
I love, there was this meme, this amused me to no end. There was this meme going around, I dip into Facebook occasionally, and all of a sudden I started seeing like some of my friends, and you know, professional photographers, professional designers, people who should know better, posting these like huge like blocks of text to their walls. I'm like, what the hell is going on? They're posting an indemnity clause into their Facebook wall, basically saying all of the material that I post on my profile and all of the pictures and all this stuff, it belongs to me and nobody has any permission to use it, etc., etc., etc. And I'm thinking, like, you didn't read your EULA, did you?
You should also read Facebook's terms of service because they would be like, LOL, you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
They own you.
Yeah, but that's the great thing about certain platforms like Flickr, where you actually can set the copyright to your own work. And that's important. That's something that I actually I'm trying to work for at Tumblr, is that you need to like be able to like set that explicitly. I mean, we do in our terms of service say like, that you own all of your work. We just have a right to redistribute it with your attribution.
Who strips attribution on Tumblr? Who does that?
What?
Who are those people? The people who strip attribution on Tumblr?
Who strips
Assholes.
attribution?
I don't know. Everyone's an asshole.
Yeah, it's so
terrible.
easy. Like
Yeah.
how it takes work to strip attribution.
Yeah, we work really hard to put tools in place to make attribution stick, and people go out of their way to make it look like it's theirs.
So, Nick, you had a question.
Oh yeah, my understanding of the Shepherd Ferry thing was that he blew his own case by committing perjury.
Yeah.
Yep.
He might have won had he
Yep.
just said, I own it and it's fair, or
Yep.
used the phrase, but he claimed that he had. But what's interesting about that, there are big companies do sort of IP harassment for these platforms all the time, claiming they own stuff when they don't, and there are no consequences for them.
Yep.
So my question is, are we dealing with a not level playing field right now?
Absolutely.
So the question is sort of how do we handle copyright trolling DMCA notices from big companies claiming they own? One famous recent instance was Birdsong.
So, I mean, we deal with that kind of on a daily basis. We comply with DMCA, and it's, sometimes frustrating for people, but the fact is, like, we say that you're responsible for the content on your own blog loud, but we actually are, and we will have to take it down for you if somebody complains about it.
I'm always worried that somebody's going to accidentally take down my demo reel because there's work in it that I made, but I made for something for national broadcast, and I'm always nervous that there's going to be something that trips the system.
Well, now, yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Now we're talking about robots for real. I mean,
Yeah.
because I don't know if you guys heard, like, in the science fiction community, everybody heard about this, but the Hugo Awards, which are the big awards that happen, you know, every year for science fiction and fantasy, or rather science fiction, I'm sorry, were webcast over Ustream. And part of the awards is obviously they have a reel. They have a reel for like any, you know, TV work or whatever. As soon as the reels hit, the robots flagged it as copyrighted content and shut the stream down, shut the live stream down. They happened to do it in the middle of Neil Gaiman's acceptance speech. He tweeted about it and it was a huge shitstorm. But, you know, the fact remains that the robots incorrectly tag this stuff. And once the live stream is over, there's no recovery. There's no...
It's no longer live.
Yeah, there's no point to doing it. So, you know, these things are... You're absolutely right. This is not a level playing field. And the only thing you can do is kind of, you know, protect yourself as much as possible. Going back to Flickr, one of the wonderful things about Flickr is that not only can you set your own terms for your imagery, but you can search by those imageries. So, like, for example, if I'm doing a piece where I want to use found imagery, I'll search on Flickr for stuff that's Creative Commons that is licensed for me to use. So I don't have to waste my time trying to find, you know, if I need to find the rights holder, if I need to pay a licensing fee, etc., etc. I just stick my search to those parameters, and it's a little bit more peace of mind.
They've also added a thing that actually lets you license directly through getting people's Flickr images, which is great, because in documentary, like, we have a ton of archival material, and we have to prove every single image that we have all the rights to it. And it even involves sometimes, just to get things high enough resolution for broadcast, like paying somebody several $100s to go take a picture of a painting that's 700 years old, but we need it HD, and there's only one little picture online. And so we end up paying license fees on stuff that should totally be free, because it's the only way to actually get it high enough quality.
Jack?
Somebody already brought up Creative Commons. I'm just wondering if anybody, who among you distributes things through Creative Commons, or why or why not don't you, or have you had any experiences with that?
So the question is, who among you, who among us, uses Creative Commons, and why or why not?
So I use Creative Commons. I'm a pretty big believer in it, both as a creator and as a consumer. I license most of my work through a, I think it's non-commercial share alike. So basically, the one that says that you can use my work as long as you're not making money off of it, and you can change it and all that stuff. I think Creative Commons is imperfect, but it's certainly the best alternative that we have now. And to your point, Paul, you're absolutely right. I think Creative Commons lays the groundwork for a further codification of copyright issues, and getting to a point where copyright is actually something sane that we can codify and we can automate. We're not there yet, and I don't think we'll get there in a short time.
Well, we can code it. It's then just the cultural adoption that's going to be hard. Coding it,
But I do believe that Creative Commons permeates that sort of philosophy, and it's growing and expanding constantly, because it's easier to be that way than to be a hard ass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, it's easier to be that way than it is to be a hard ass, unless you're a large company with a very large label.
Yes, yes.
You know, lawyers, man.
How does releasing stuff under Creative Commons impact trying to sell it?
Oh, well, that's actually a thing we've run into at work, where we've found things we wanted to use that were non-commercial share alike, and we've gone and we couldn't figure out how to get in touch with the person that was behind them, and we couldn't figure out how to license them commercially. We could only figure out how to do it if we were also giving away our film, which we can't do.
So there are these.
Well, there's a need for a kind of registry, like I said.
Yeah, there's a need for something like that, or for the ability to sort of override the license and have an agreement, have some kind of standard.
So there are these photographers who are losing license revenue from you guys because you can't find them to write them checks.
Yep.
Yep.
And this. That's a
Which is
strange.
why you should make yourself publicly available.
Yes.
On a platform like Tumblr.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like sometimes you'll find like somebody's Tumblr or Flickr page and find their email and they just never respond. And can't use their picture.
Janet?
Have you run into this problem where you Google yourself and you discover that the robots have made clones?
Have you Googled, okay, so the question is, have you Googled yourself and found, I'm assuming, scraper clones of yourself where your entire site's duplicated somewhere?
No, but
Is there a way to use
I've had
that?
people steal my
Is there a way to use that?
steal pictures of me from my Tumblr and put onto like satellite porn link sites where like they've used my image to be like, this is a girl. There are girls on this website, and then it like links to the website. It's so weird.
You know,
Sorry.
I discovered something. I did a reputation management on Google myself, and actually, I confess, I don't have a Facebook profile that I made. I never went on Facebook at all because it's part of the Panelists. But there's a Facebook page on me that it made itself. It's kind of first it freaked me out, but then I said, okay, whatever, because if I
Do you
wanted
have a
to edit
Wikipedia
it,
page?
yeah, it took
That's
me-
why. Facebook brought in Wikipedia and made everyone a
Someone
page.
searched
Yeah.
for me on there, and it went out and gathered, scraped whatever it could, and created a page, and it just says public figure.
We had the little viral video Kevin and I made. Somebody downloaded it and re-uploaded it with their own ads. There were like that happens, and Nick actually has a thing. You said that what you do is you upload something as a hidden link so that no one else can steal it. Can you explain this?
Okay, so this is not terribly well known, but anybody can ask to use YouTube's content matching service. Like the same way that big company, and now you won't have the same privilege to go around yelling at people that big companies have, but you can identify your own work. And what you do is you upload, you basically contact them through the partner program or the creator program, or whatever they're calling it these days. You get an extra tab, and you can mark a video you upload, regardless of whether it's public, unlisted, or private. So you can upload a private video that you don't even want online, purely for the purpose of using their content matching service. You don't have to put it on YouTube to the public. You can upload this video, and then it will find copies of it, and it will give you the option, at least from what I can see, I gather there are different systems for different like levels of mocker, but what I see anyway is an option to take down or monetize. So for me, when people re-upload my work, it is monetized. They run ads on it as if it were mine, and I get the pennies.
So this is, I want to say this again for posterity into the microphone, because posterity can't hear you, is that YouTube has a system where you can register your videos with its content management so that other copies of it will be flagged, and then you can put ads on them or take them down. There are a lot of interesting ways of trying to monetize your content getting stolen and thrown around the web, and it's obviously easier, as you were saying, if you're a big giant company.
One more small thing. The reason that I never do takedown is translations. A lot of the re-uploads are subtitled in another language, which is good.
Yeah, that's useful.
Any other questions? CJ.
Are you guys ever like scared about all this? Or just talking about robots and clones?
Well, so robots and clones are two very different things, because if I can clone myself to be more productive, that's awesome. If the robots are taking over and killing us all, then we're screwed.
No, I mean this is kind of the first generation that has the responsibility of like figuring out all these new formats, and I mean, is that empowering or just terrifying?
So there's a lot of responsibility inherent in what's going on right now. And is that empowering or scary? Lisa?
I don't think that we're some special generation that has changed that's so different from some other generation. I think it just feels that way. You know, I think that, so I don't know that I have fear. Sometimes I get overstimulated, and I have to remember that change is natural and things go in cycles, and innovation is something that's always happening. So that's my...
It doesn't feel like there's a sort of pressure to create faster and faster and faster and faster. And then, especially with the thing of if you have one thing that's successful, where's the next thing?
Yeah.
And it just, the turnaround time is getting shorter and shorter. Everything we do, even at work, We have half the time we used to have to make a documentary. Everything is just around the clock, nobody's sleeping.
The internet never sleeps.
It's true.
Do you want to talk about that responsibility?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I feel I get a lot of artists who feel that pressure as well, and I know people who post things 10 to 100 times a day. We have teenagers who reach our post limit every day, which is 250 posts, and they're angry, and they're like, why can't I post more? So it's kind of insane, but I mean, I think that there is this like voraciousness that comes from the creator side and the consumer side, and it's maybe unhealthy, but there's no stopping it.
For myself, I just want to say that part of the motivation behind organizing this conference is fear. Is fear that we're not sharing with each other what we're figuring out, and that we're not getting ahead enough in how the internet is changing our lives. This is about responding to being scared that we're not together enough on this in a lot of weird ways.
Did you see the acceptance speech that Kevin posted as part of the press release for the event?
Oh, yeah.
Did you actually watch it?
The
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that spoke to that fear because then it brings it back to the work and why we're tackling these questions in a really beautiful way. Everybody watch that. Neil Gaiman. Acceptance speech.
Do you want to talk about that responsibility, Pablo?
I think in one way it's a heavier responsibility and a heavier load because you are doing more of it yourself, and there is that pressure to keep doing stuff and keep doing stuff and keep doing stuff faster, better, more. On the other hand, I think it's also, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, I think it's also a really good opportunity to kind of take control of your own work in the sense that, yes, the internet is always on. We can do faster work, we can do more work, but should we? Should we feed that demon as much as it wants to be fed? Or do we find our own rhythm? Do we find our own pace? Do we find that optimal level at which we're doing our best work and we're putting stuff out there as fast as we can, as comfortably as we can? Because, the robots are faster than the humans, and it's chasing the dragon. You're never going to be fast enough because the network is much faster than human thought. So you have to kind of, it allows us now to kind of take a step back, analyze, and kind of really be mindful about the work that we're doing and how we're going about it, and what, if any, we want to change in order to make our lives more comfortable.
Well, then it kind of speaks to this sort of notion of, does art come from a place of isolation, or can it come from a place of community? And I think more so now it comes from a place of community and publicness than it used to. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing or a demonic thing, but I think that you can embrace it or not, and you still have a choice.
Right.
It does sort of make the reaction much more personal though, and like there are weird things that happen. Like I had somebody upload or post something I did to Reddit to trash it, and
What a surprise.
it's just like, hey, that's my thing. What are you doing? And it felt really personal and like this really unfair thing. And then I realized there's nothing you can do. You can't stop that. And you actually hear this kind of reaction directly, and that can be really hard. And it can make you go, oh, I don't want to make any more of these because this one guy on Reddit hated it.
That's actually really interesting. There's this spate of, and this happens periodically, but generally, a truism in the publishing industry is advice for authors: don't read your own reviews, and that goes double for the Amazon reviews, right?
And Yelp reviews.
Right, and Reddit.
There's so many places to review things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or just game the reviews.
Yeah, right. Just don't get caught. But that every time something flares up, and inevitably, once or twice a year, some author will make a complete ass of themselves, or artist or whatever, just responding to these reviews. It really, I'm very grateful that I went to art school, because if nothing else, art school taught me how to respond to critiques, and it also taught me how to distinguish between critique and just straight up criticism, which is not necessarily funded, fundamentally, based on fundamental, concepts. So And it's really interesting to me to watch. It's one of those blind spots that we all have, that I have personally. It's like, I'm okay with people trashing my work on the internet because I'm pretty good at telling when somebody's on point and when somebody's actually calling out my work and critiquing it and saying, hey, this sucks, but it sucks because of X, Y, Z. And hey, those are really good points. Maybe I need to step up my game. Or, this sucks because I'm the troll and I want to make some noise.
Yeah, the difference between artistic feedback and trolling.
Yeah.
And don't feed the trolls. Don't do that.
Unless you want to get into a nice scrap.
Yeah.
But then you've got to have time.
Yeah.
I'm going to be thinking about that question for such a good question. That's going to resonate with me. That are you afraid of this? Because I had my answer and then now I'm asking it again. Good answer. Good question.
So are you afraid of this?
Well, I'm sort of tying it together with because we started talking about responsibility, which I think is interesting. And you talked about the ability to take risk and learn from fucking up, and you're talking about coming together as a community and sharing our fuck-ups or sharing our successes and learning from them. And fear's not always a bad thing in the creative process, right? Coming from a dance background, it's definitely not. That there's something really interesting on the other side of that. So, yes, we're afraid, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, because we don't really have a choice.
That's part of it too. It's working through that fear. That's part of the process more often than not.
Okay, and I think that's actually a great note to close on, because we're at about 1 p.m. and I want to make sure that all of you have a chance to eat something, because it's quite a day we have. So thank you very, very much to the panelists and to the audience.